It's the spring planting season at the Ithaca Community Gardens, and Will Parker has work to do. He fires up his tractor and makes a final pass over a garden plot that he just recently finished cleaning up.
This was all completely overgrown. You could not see the highway from this point.
The plot isn't the nicest in the gardens. It's right by a busy state highway. But the gardeners agreed it was finally time to clean it up. And Will, a member of the board that manages the gardens and one of the only gardeners with a tractor, was the man for the job.
So I'm trying to get a good jump start on getting the place workable so that people can feel inspired to take over. And then after that, things can kind of move on their own.
Will tells me that clearing the plot was hard work, but that he was happy to do it. And that's because this time last year, it looked like the gardens might not have this plot, or any plots, to call their own. The fight about the community gardens lease began because of a pretty simple problem.
There's not a lot of available land in the downtown area.
That's Judith Barker. She's the president of Project Growing Hope. They're the not-for-profit that runs the gardens. She told me that the gardens found the land they ended up leasing from the city, out of necessity.
We're under power lines, there's a highway, there's a railroad, there's Andre Petroleum. Nothing wrong with those things, but it's not a beautiful setting for a garden. We ended up there because it was the only land available.
Even so, the gardens made it their home. For 20 years, they dealt with the power lines and the highway and focused on planting and harvesting. But then, last year, their lease was set to expire, and what the gardens had simply tolerated about their location, the railroad and the petroleum plant, those power lines, started looking like assets to an entirely different group of people.
In many ways, this is and continues to be what I feel is an appropriate place for industrial development.
That's Cynthia Brock. She's a member of the Ithaca Common Council, and she told me that at first, she wasn't in favor of letting the gardens stay on that land.
By tying up that lot, so to speak, it limits what possibilities can be brought together for increasing development in the city.
The gardens are located on some of the last available land within the city limits, land that any developer would love. And the developer held the option to purchase that land, but only if the garden's lease wasn't renewed. But not renewing the garden's lease would potentially leave them without a home.
So it became a very complicated situation all around for the developer, for the city, and for the gardens themselves.
A complicated situation with complicated questions about the nitty-gritty details of running a city. First, there were questions about the tax base. It was argued that developing the land could bring in more tax revenue for the city of Ithaca, which could have big impacts.
We do have a very small tax base in the city, and as long as we are limited in that tax base, the financial burdens that are placed on our property owners are exceptionally high. So I don't believe that it works for the best interest of all of the residents in the city to keep this land undeveloped when there could be a better use for it.
All I'm hearing is we have to increase the tax base, we have to develop, we need a Hyatt hotel. I mean, sometimes I call it drinking the developer's Kool-Aid.
So, no consensus there. There were also questions about whether a private group, like the gardens, should be able to use city land.
As opposed to a park that anybody can walk in and use. The Community Gardens is a membership organization. People join the organization, they have a plot. And so it's a use of public land that is not open for everybody anytime.
But private groups in Ithaca do use city land. TCAT has bus shelters on land they lease from the city, and the Ithaca Dog Park, that's on city land too. In all these cases, the city still owns the land. The issue is that, after a while, it can stop feeling that way.
Once a private group has possession of property for an extended period of time, there is a sense of entitlement to it. It's always going to be difficult because they will feel that they have an unlimited right to that property, even though they don't own it.
There's some jokes about gardeners and cultivating land, and once you've cultivated for a while, you think you own it, and nobody better take an inch of it away from you.
And Judith said this is how the gardeners felt about their land, which, all joking aside, isn't that unreasonable. The city had given the gardens a great deal on their 20-year lease, only charging them $1 a year. And when the city sold the land around the gardens to a developer, they let the gardens stay. A lot of people assumed the gardens would continue to receive this kind of support from the city, even though they didn't technically own the land. And even though someone else, that developer, had the option to purchase that land, like Cynthia said, it was complicated. But in the end, what broke through the clutter of arguments and disagreement was one simple question. A question that gardener Will Parker, the tractor guy, found himself asking.
How's it going to look for a super progressive city to lose their only community gardens?
Once people started asking this question, the fight over the garden's lease started looking like a fight about Ithaca's ideological direction as a city. And to many people, the loss of this community gardens, the only one in the city limits, would have been a step in the wrong direction. And this got people riled up. Other community groups, ones focused on sustainable agriculture and food justice, came out in support of the gardens. Someone created a Save the Gardens Facebook page, and someone else made an internet petition that was signed by people as far away as Ireland and India. Judith told me this kind of public support was new, but welcome.
One of the things that happened during the lease negotiations was finding out that we had support from other groups, because we were almost like, ostriches with our heads in the sand. We weren't connected.
All these new connections got the city paying attention. And in that climate, voting against a new lease for the gardens would have incurred some pretty serious public backlash. So, in the end, the Common Council renewed the lease with the same terms, 20 years at $1 a year. And even Cynthia, who was originally against the lease extension, was on board. But there was a catch.
There is a short termination clause on this lease. We do have the ability to free this area up for development if a viable and interesting project comes forward.
Basically, we're given a year's notice and the rest of a gardening season. And so, like, if the city gave us notice in July, the lease would end the next July. Then it wouldn't end in July. It would end probably November 1st, when somebody decided the gardening season was over.
This compromise was a way for the city to honor their agreement with the developer and continue to show their support for a beloved city institution. And when the issue was finally settled and lease extension finally made official, Judith said the mood of the gardens changed.
All of a sudden it was like, oh, we can think about something else now. We can do something else with our volunteer time. All of a sudden there was all this positive energy out there. And last year you couldn't get anybody to do anything.
The energy the gardens put into their fight with the city didn't go away when that fight was over. Judith says it's being channeled into new and important projects that will make the organization stronger.
We can focus on cleaning up the grounds. We can focus on revitalizing the board and working together better as a group, finding ways to engage gardeners' energy better. We can take a breather now.
And they know that breather will come in handy, because once the city gets a good development plan for the land, the gardens could find themselves right back where they started.
And so, yeah, we feel a sigh of relief, but we know it's temporary. In the back of our minds, we know perfectly well that we still have this issue. We still have this problem.
Last season was a hard one for the Ithaca Community Gardens. They survived it, but their future is uncertain. They don't know if all their hard work will amount to anything in the long run. But Judith says that deep down, they're holding on to the same hope that every gardener has at the start of a new season, that their hard work will pay off.
Gardening is a ongoing process. It's a sort of like faith in the future. And so you come in the first year and you spend the first year getting all the weeds out and getting organic matter into the soil and improving the soil. You get paid back. It gets better each year.
For WRFI, I'm Samuel Whitehead in Ithaca.